you know, did you record it? La 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 la. So is it okay if I record and then we'll go back and edit
Yeah,
anything
that's
out that
fine.
I'm
Oh,
probably going to be the person who says something I shouldn't, and then say, "Ooh, cut that, cut that out of the recording," because
no, no
I
problem.
do that, because I do that. Cool,
No
cool.
problem.
So, give me a clue at what level or orientation your interest is, and that way I don't wander off topic too badly.
Well, you mentioned that your PhD thesis at the University of Oslo
Yeah.
was a critical input into the thinking behind the manifesto. So that's the first I hear of it. So I'm keen to find out what that was about.
Yeah. So okay. So here's what's on my mind. First of all, I think that certain people are not well represented in terms of the thoughts, the history of the person, because what showed up in the manifesto is, originally it was like, oh, the seven named methodologies present, right? But
Right.
then if you look at the conversation, people stopped representing the methodologies and started representing their own background at some
Right.
moment, right? And so now you have to go, well, who was that individual person, like Jim Highsmith, right?
Mhm.
He didn't represent a methodology, named methodology, but his background was, and his thinking and his reading were like very deep. He may have
Right.
been the only person there who knew that there was a thing called agile manufacturing, right? So
Mhm.
I hadn't given it a thought. I mean, the word agile wasn't in my mind. But like some months later, because he was in Salt Lake at the time, and I was
Mhm.
visiting him, he pulls out this book called Agile Manufacturing or whatever, and I read the foreword, right? I go, but that's us. But where'd that come from, right? They had done that 10 years before, right?
Right.
So he didn't
Right.
let on any of that stuff, right? But he knew all that stuff.
Mhm.
And he's there in the room parleying the way that he's parleying
Mhm.
with all of that, like he's watching us jump around,
Mhm.
and he knows what he's dropping into the conversation, which we don't, right?
Right.
Yeah, and that stuff's not captured right anywhere. And
Right.
in particular, the DSDM community in Europe had a
Mhm.
set of 9 principles that when I finally read them, like 3 to 6 months later, I went,
Mhm.
why did we write our principles? They're all there. It's done. We could have just said thank you DSDM, dropped them in. They were perfect. There was nothing missing, right? And they did that
Right.
around 95, 96. And I'm like, who are these people? What was their origin story that they could produce these incredible principles, right? And so it was the
Right.
DSDM guy there, Ari van Bennekom, and he was
Mhm.
bringing in his knowledge of what the construction of the DSDM stuff was into our conversation. That was interesting. So
Right.
so there's so there's two kind of threads. The one is my own personal thread, which personally I don't think gets enough play. And every time somebody says the history of Agile, I go, if you don't take into account, I did ethnographic studies for 10 years. I didn't have a history. I didn't come from Scrum or right. Mine is straight science all the way down.
Mhm.
I'm a field ethnographer. I'm a theoretical ethnographer. I write about the theory of software development. Right. That's my specialty.
So how did you go from Case Western to the University of Oslo?
Well, so I was working for IBM Research in Zurich in the 80s, in the late 80s, and we had 2 kids born there. And in
Mhm.
1990, we had to get back to the U.S.
Mhm.
So I was looking for a job, and also it was a recession in 1990. And
Mhm.
literally, the only place I could find,
Mhm.
I could get a job in a product division, which I wouldn't have. But the IBM consulting group, I don't know if you were aware of that, had a very short lifetime, like 5 years, no more.
Uh-huh.
And IBM started an honest to goodness management consulting sub company that was not
Uh-huh.
IBM Services. It was supposed to be independent of IBM Services,
Mhm.
and they got swallowed by the IBM Services guys were better at the back office backstabbing than the poor naive Anderson consultants were.
Ah.
And so they got swallowed by services. But for that little time period, there wasn't actually a pure consulting service. In
Mhm.
1991, when I was trying to jump over there,
Right.
uh, they needed a methodology written for Smalltalk and C++ projects. So they had They were going to have a methodology. They had a methodology. It was actually very subtle, much too subtle for those days, created by Wayne
Right.
Stevens. And they
Right.
needed a little plug-in part for the Smalltalk and C++, and they hired me, brought me over from Switzerland. And I
Mm-hmm.
got all the books at the time. I got the Rumbaugh book, the Jakobson book. I got Rebecca Wiersbrock's book. I got the Schlemmeller book. And I said to my boss, they all disagree with each other, and I can't tell what's right because I don't know anything because I was like totally new. And then
Mm-hmm.
she said the words, that changed my life. She says, why don't you go and debrief, interview some projects and find out what works and doesn't work? We don't have a prior vested interest in this space, so whatever you say will be good. So
Mm-hmm.
that was in 91. I started interviewing projects, and I would show up and say, what'd you do, right? What'd you like, not like, what'd you do again? What are the lessons learned? Like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it became super obvious, like within a couple of interviews, that there's 10,000 ways to fail. And interviewing failing projects was not interesting. I really wasn't going to learn anything except like this obvious stupid stuff and you fail. There were very few projects that succeeded. And so I had two questions.
Mm-hmm.
Um, did it succeed? And would the
Mm-hmm.
people on the project be willing to work the same way again?
Mm-hmm.
And you'd be
Yeah.
amazed at the number of people who say, Alistair, you should come. Because it was known I was interviewing projects. I flew all over the world. Alistair,
Right.
interview our project. And I ask them the two questions, and I get to the second question, they go, well, maybe not. And I go, why would I ask? If they don't want to work the same way again, why would I care? Right? Lots of things we can do if we force people to do stuff they hate. That's not what I'm about, right?
Right. Right.
It was inside IBM, outside IBM. There were
Mm-hmm.
critical projects that did something interesting in Canada and New Zealand, right? I went around the world. Took
Mm-hmm.
Ivar Jakobsen's use case course in like 92 or 93. So we put that in there. And I came up with the first draft in 92. And the reason I know that is because because I was inside IBM, I got to see the pre-publication of the Gang of Four book, right? The Design Patterns book,
Mm-hmm.
because Vlasides was inside IBM Research. So I got that. So by the end of 92, I had settled on, I said, I don't know about the rest of the stuff in those books. What I know is you need incremental development.
Mm-hmm.
We picked use cases for the requirements. We picked CRC cards for the design technique.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was code, right? Versioning, profiling. That was it. That's all there was. And I said, I'm not adding anything else because I can't find any value in anything else. So that was the way
Right.
we were talking at the time. It's not like there was a master design. It's like
Mm-hmm.
I chose to do errors of omission instead of errors of commission.
Right.
Easier to add something than to take something out. So I said, it's sufficient. And so design patterns show up. And then immediately I said, and pop in design patterns, right?
Mm-hmm.
So then of those articles I published online, I wrote an article for IBM Systems Journal 93, which was the impact of object orientation on application development. And it's a freaking encyclopedia article. Like I can't even believe what's inside of there. Like it's like everything's in there. Full analysis of, what is application development? What are objects? What objects do? What are methodologies? What do they do? What's the
Mm-hmm.
impact? What do you do? How do you choose? It's all in there. And it was really cool because in 99, they chose for the 50-year anniversary of IBM Systems Journal to reprint that article. That was one of the like 10 articles from the whole 50 years of IBM Systems Journal that they chose to re-include. So that was like a real honor for me.
Wow.
So that was here's the space we're coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And I chose to come in out of all of the different approaches to methodologies through the basically Rebecca Wiersbrock, Adele Goldberg, Smalltalk camp. Said we're going to
Mm-hmm.
go for pure objects and blah, 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 blah. And then that puts you inside of a certain community of people, right, where you end up talking to. So I flew to Minneapolis to watch Ward Cunningham lead a CRC exercise.
Mm-hmm.
So I can still like almost speak like Ward in turning the cards over with the little hesitations, and I can replay all of that, right? And I took advanced Smalltalk programming class from Kent Beck, right? So these guys were my teachers in the 91,
Right.
92, 93 timeframe.
Right.
Then produced a second article I put in 94, produced my first external publication in Object Magazine called In Search of Methodology, in which I said, this is really all you need. You need use cases, incremental development, use cases, and let's see, our C cards and code environment. And apparently, and I think that was 94, and I think apparently that started a food fight over in England. There was a conference, and one of the guys, John Daniels, who he and somebody had a methodology that was, to my mind, very complicated, no doubt, very sophisticated, very complicated. So I wouldn't touch it. He told me years later, he said at the something conference, they had a session on your paper, and it was a giant fight. And I said, it's like what? He said, well, like half the people were like, if it's not exactly correct, it's very close. And the other half were like, this can't possibly work. Like, it's a load of junk. And I said, which side were you on? He said, that's a load of junk. So that was him at that time. So that was like my first like official kind of like, here's a recommendation about how to go. And then I had more article on like what is incremental development. Everybody was like trying to figure out what the hell is incremental development. How do you manage it? How do you talk about it? How do you convince people, etc. So those were the 3 articles that I did. And then I left IBM. And in 94, 95, I was the lead consultant, the methodology guy, obviously, on a pretty big project IBM had with Ralston Purina. And what happened there was, we had 12 Smalltalk programmers on a project of like 50 people. There were COBOL people, database people, right? And fortunately, the client was very sophisticated. They had already done incremental development. They had already done client server. They had already had user representation, right? All the stuff that we came in that we thought was radical, object-oriented, woody. They knew. Right? They were really good client, very good people, and so we were always able to dialogue with them. So we had an 18-month project, fixed price, fixed time, $10 million. I think it came in over budget. IBM sucked it up, but it came in on time, and they were still maintaining the system 10 years later, so it was a success. And whenever we had problems, because nobody knew how to manage 12 Smalltalk programmers at the time, right? And object relational database mappers and stuff. And I would say, well, I heard a story, because I collected stories, as I do now. Somebody told me that they did this. Let's try that. And so we'd try that, and it worked. And after enough of those, I stopped telling the story, just started telling the punchline. And said, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? Then I became a consultant, because then I didn't reveal my sources anymore. So that was there. And then in 96, 97, I wrote the first book, Surviving O Projects, in which I give all the details of the project interviews, success, not success, parameterized case study of this one project, recommendations about methodology, adopting, scaling, all that stuff came out in late 97. I was now where does Oslo come in? Oslo, I decided to give myself a sabbatical year, and I ended up getting a job at the Central Bank of Norway in Oslo. And I was going to learn about role modeling, Trygve Reinskau's stuff, and hook it to Java, the Java protocols and interfaces and stuff. Never did, because they gave me a project to manage that tried to commit suicide like twice a week. It was a big mainframe, all of the bank-to-bank transactions in the country of Norway funneling in, hitting a mainframe written, LU 6.2 kicks, assembler language, not a piece of Agile, Smalltalk, nothing anywhere in sight, right? And so I ended up spending the entire year jumping around, playing games, with all of that. And that's where Oslo comes in, because I was also teaching at the University of Oslo about object-oriented design and stuff like that. So that's where my connection with Oslo shows up, and the University of Oslo, right? And in that year, Kent Beck in 96, pretty much, early 97, came up with XP from the Chrysler project. And in my project interviews, I flew to Detroit. I'm the only person that I know of that actually interviewed the people at the C3 project. So in 98, passed through Detroit, sat with Ron Jeffries and all the people, did my interviews, right? What's XP? Why does it work? Blah, blah, like, don't like, all that stuff. And wrote up a little bit about it. But while I was in Norway, so while I was at the central bank, I could see all of the different projects they had. And I arrived there saying you have to have a different methodology for every project. You can't have a common methodology, was what I said. And they, of course,
Right.
said, yeah, we hear you. Now, what is that methodology that we should have? What everybody says, right? I hear you that we can't have it. So what is it that we should have, right? Give us the one answer. And so I spent the year trying to convince them that they couldn't. But it was like a little laboratory because literally I could look around, take any idea I had for what to write, and look at a project and break it, right? Oh, that wouldn't work there. Well, that wouldn't work there. Well, that wouldn't work there. Well, that wouldn't work there. So it was really spectacular. It was like a little micro lab,
Yeah.
On how to do that. And then, so that was the year. Then I wrote a paper called Methodology per Project. I came up with the notion of crystal with different colors for different sizes and characteristics of projects. So it was a multi-methodology.
Yeah.
And all of that stuff. And then 99 or 2000, I can't remember which, got the wild, hairy idea I should turn all of this into a PhD dissertation.
Okay.
and the rules of the game were, I'm not going to take any more classes, right? It has to be a thesis only. And it has to allow me to talk about human social elements.
Right.
Now, the interesting thing is that it turns out, I didn't know that I should have gone to a business school, like University of Georgia, right? Business school. When I got all done and I started rereading new papers, all of the interesting papers came out of business schools. None of them came out of computer science or software engineering departments. They literally, in the U.S., will not let you talk about humans in a software engineering department. So I had to go to Europe. So I ended up back at the University of Oslo, where I had a valid claim as to why I should be allowed to do a thesis-only doctorate there, and they would allow me to incorporate the human elements and work with the university in Denmark, in Aarhus, where they also were doing similar kinds of methodology work. And what was interesting was the big deal at that time was the methodology per project. But in the academic world in Scandinavia, they already knew this. They already knew about incremental development. They already knew about methodology. They were like, it was hard to find something they didn't know to talk about. And it turned out the turning point was they didn't know about mid-project interim retrospectives where you change the process within the project. Everybody still thought you ran a process for a whole project.
Right.
And off of the work that I saw in '92, the project interviews, the C3 project, but particularly this one particular project I saw in 1992 that changed my whole life, the one in Canada, was the concept that you could change everything about the methodology in the middle of the project without damage. Right? That was like mind-blowing to me at the time and was new news to the PhD committee. So that took until a couple of years. You know how those things are. And I finally got the doctorate in 2003, right? But I started in 2000. And in that, I was able to take a 10-year look at the shift in technologies and how that affects methodology shifts, right? And so I poured everything that I could into the PhD. So it was really interesting. I wrote the book, Agile Software Development, basically at the same time I was writing my PhD dissertation. So they were like the same thoughts, one going to the public and one going to the academics, right? Yeah.
Right.
And so in that time period, I started around 96, really trying to formulate why does stuff work. So that's why I say I'm kind of the theoretical person in our industry because I connect. Whenever I would write down a pattern, right, I would go, as in its recommendation, why would we think it would plausibly work? What is it about this that we think it should work at all? So that's kind of a theoretical question, right? So by early 2000s, I had encoded lots of stuff about rules for collaboration. We increased those to what causes, decreases trust, distance, people, time, right? Incremental development, why do you do that? Staging, you get all the lean Kanban, you get the queuing theory, all that stuff. And so that's been my back suitcase is, I teach a class called Advanced Agile. It's the only place I get to unpack my suitcase. And say, here's why everything works. Now take a case study and see if you can apply any of that, right? Because people aren't used to working that way. So that's the background, and you see there's what I was mentioning to Ellen yesterday that's relevant. So that's my personal journey. But But what's not spoken in there that I think is super important in the history of the manifesto is the network of conversations that was active in the 90s. Who was talking with whom? Who was practicing which ideas? Because you get this, right? You get this drift and this borrowing of ideas.
Right.
So nowhere in here is anybody talking about the patterns movement, right? So Ralph Johnson, Brian Foote, Jim Copeland, and I don't know to what extent Ward Cunningham, Kent Beck, were foundational in, and Richard Gabriel, creating what they called writers' workshops at the UC, University of Indiana Urbana campus. And they would every year have these days. And we practiced talking together. And we talked in a certain way, right? And it's that manner of talking, dialoguing, exposing that showed up in the manifesto meeting, right? So if you look at the manifesto meeting, who was there? Kent was there. He knew this. Ward was there. Martin Fowler was there. I was there. Ron Jeffries was there. There were at least 4 to 5 people who had been in the patterns workshops.
Right.
We knew how to talk in a certain way. All those who didn't would just fall into that way of talking because it was a good way of talking. There was a guy who I don't think gets enough mention. His name's John Hopkins, Jon Hopkins. And in 93, 4, 5, I think I missed the 93 one. I don't know if it was the first or second one. He decided that he wanted to collect some people in Snowbird and go skiing in the 3rd week of February. And he created a thing called Workshop on Object-Oriented Design. And I had just moved to Salt Lake. And I knew Ward from having visited him. And I asked Ward, hey, I live at the bottom of the hill. Can I come up and gate crash? And he said, sure, why not? So I did. And I met Martin Fowler, who was also gate crashing pretty much, you know. And Martin's known for having said at that time, I'm the only person in this room whose name I don't recognize. Because we had Adele Goldberg, Kenny Rubin, Ivar Jakobsen, Agneta, Jim Rumba, Larry Constantine, and his partner, who's woman Lucy, I think her name is Lucy Lockwood, right? And Martin and me, and I can't remember who else, and Ward and Kent, right? And I don't know if Norm Kurth was there or not. I can't remember. And we talked about like what are hot topics in object-oriented design these days, right? And so Ivar talked about use cases for like 2 days, right? And then and none of us understood anything. And the irony is that I had just decoded Ivar, right? I'd taken his class, I had produced a guidebook for IBM, and I wasn't allowed to talk about it because it was all IBM confidential as how IBM was going to kill its competitors by using this stuff. So I had to zip my lip and not say a thing. And then the next year, Ivar didn't come back. And everybody said, what's a use case? And then 17 people had 17 different interpretations. And Jim Rumbaugh said, well, I wrote about it this way. And Kent said, I think it's a user story. And somebody else said, Martin Fowler said, I think it's Swedish for scenario. And, whatever else. And all hell broke loose. But so we did it a year later, 94, 95, right? And so if you look at the structure of the manifesto meeting, because I organized it, I copied it literally after John Hopkins would. We did 4 hours, 5 hours in the morning, ski, a couple of hours in the evening, 2 days, boom, right? And here's the point: who in that manifesto room had been in the Wood meetings? Well, Ward Cunningham, Kent Beck, Martin Fowler, me, right? So we knew the drill. We knew the shape. We knew the shape of a meeting, right? So then, Bob, Martin. So what happened was there was the Wood meetings in 94, 95. Then I went to Norway, and in 98, I said, we need another one of those things. And I organized one on the ferry boat that goes through all the ferries in Norway. Rebecca Wiersbrock and Alan Wiersbrock came over, Jim Copeland, Ward Cunningham, Rebecca Wiersbrock, Alan Wiersbrock. I already said that. Anyway, a bunch of people, right? And we did the Wood thing again. What was it? Talk for an hour or so. Go on shore, the next town, walk around, have lunch, come back, then for a couple of days.
Right.
So I had, in 2000, I had already scheduled that in February of 2001, we were going to do it again.
Right.
I was kind of assembling my invitee list, and I get this email from Bob Martin saying, hey guys, I think there's a bunch of us talking alike. I'd like to have a meeting and write a manifesto.
Mm-hmm.
And his invitation list was better than my invitation list because he had like Tom DeMarco and Grady Booch and stuff on there. And his topic was better than my topic, so I said, I'll throw in with him.
Mm-hmm.
And then Jim Highsmith and I were both in Salt Lake, but we both said, like, Chicago in February is really sick. That's not nice, not a nice place.
Right.
So we basically, we basically shanghaied it and said, we'll organize it if we hold it in Utah. And so I took that on. Mm-hmm. And then what also doesn't get enough mention is Cutter, the Cutter mm-hmm. Journal. Jim mm-hmm. Highsmith had just joined them, and they helped sponsor it. I think they sponsored drinks the first night, not a whole lot else, but it didn't matter. They showed up with some money and they sponsored it. So mm-hmm. I set it up with the timetable and everything, just like John Hopkins did with Wood. Mm-hmm. And if I look at the conversations that were present, and I'll mention there are conversations I wasn't part of. So there's a thing called the Hillside Group, and Kent Beck was in there, and maybe Grady Booch was in there, I don't know. But they had certain categories of conversations, extensions of the patterns ones, mm-hmm. right? And there are things before patterns. Anderson, and his name isn't Chris Anderson, E.N. He started a thing around 91, 92 called the Micro Architecture Handbook. He wanted to create a Micro Architecture Handbook, and that's where the Gang of Four patterns came out of, because they're not really patterns, they're really micro architectures. And that morphed or melded or got converted into the whole patterns thing. So I want my point is that if you look at the people, right, there's this tone, category of conversation, a topic, the style of interaction, the style of meeting that was passing around back and through all these people. Mm-hmm. So like Ari von Bennekem comes in from he literally only found out 2 days before. We said we need somebody from Europe, mm-hmm. from DSDM. I wrote to somebody I knew in DSDM. Ari said, I'll take a flight. He flew over from Holland, stayed there for a day and a half and flew back, right? Knows mm-hmm. nothing about nothing, right? Just like we needed a DSDM guy. Mm-hmm. So, Kent Beck's trying to explain XP, and Ari is like not following this at all, right? Mm-hmm. And the Scrum guys are describing Scrum, and he's like, mm-hmm. I don't know. And then he's describing DSDM, and then Kent Beck's going, I'm not making sense of this. It looks like big and old and heavyweight or whatever, right? And but those of us who knew how to converse mm-hmm. right, generated a stream everybody else could drop in on. Is my point, right? Yeah. So that's it. Those are the two things, my personal history. But I really want this network of conversations. I think is super important in understanding the environment, that which already existed. Right. That was inside that room from the beginning. And so, like, part of the thing at the beginning that I always remember, and it's hugely fun. So we're sitting in a room, sitting in a circle. I go, well, we need an agenda. Right, and normally that's when fights start. Like how you make an agenda, you get big fights. Somebody, and what's wonderful is nobody knows who did what, and I love to preserve the anonymity that nobody ever says who did what. Right, so somebody, one of the XP crowd, pulls an index card out of their pocket because all XP people carried index cards with them at all times. Right, at that time. Says just write it on the card, which is what they do in XP. Is you just whatever you have, you write it on an index card, and you do things with cards. It doesn't matter, right? So he goes, just write on a card and write something and throws it in the middle. And then all the XP guys, there were like 7 of them there, they all pull index cards out of their pockets, start writing, right? And then somebody else I saw goes, can I have a card? Right? And then, you have a card, everybody's writing on the card and throwing it in the middle, right? And that's where these prior conversations come to facilitate, the nature of the meeting. Right. Anyway, that's it. I spoke as fast as I could so I could dump everything in.
Yeah, well, that's very helpful, very interesting. And so then you wrote the manifesto, and then you left, and then you met about a year later, or some of you met a year later to write the principles. Is that right?
No. I don't know where that came from. What happened is, and it's really weird. I literally can't remember if it was 2 days or 3 days. I thought it was 2, maybe it was 3. But what happens is people leave, like people get on a plane. So I thought it was 2 days, and the second day, then Ari says, I can't stick around. I got to go. So we go. The process was like, Well, lightweight processes is kind of an against word. It says what we're against.
Right.
What are we for?
Right.
Now, this is a speaking habit that had been practiced in the Hillside group and the Patterns community. It was a tone, right? It's a way of speaking. So he said, well, I don't know. I guess we need a word, don't we? So we spent like an hour, and I happened to facilitate that, so I've got some memory, of that. Facilitate, flip charts full of words, discussions about words, dot vote. Took a dot vote, got it down to 5. Took a dot vote, discussed, took a vote. Actually, we ended up a tie between Agile and Adaptive. Had another discussion, did a tiebreaker vote, and came up with Agile, right? So Adaptive is like super close word.
Right.
I think you need both. So we go, well, that's nice. It's a nice word. I like it. Does it mean anything? Like, what does it mean? And then I'm, then some stuff happened. I think maybe we went skiing and conversations happened there. Conversations happened below. At some moment, we come back in the room and there's this over that. And we all walk in and go, okay, that's a structure we can get behind. And then we started debating. It's a what over it's a what, right? Do you have 4 of them? Do you have 5 of them? Do you have 3 of them? Is it this? Is it this? Is it this?
Right.
And what was the most unique thing out of all of that was we got 100% unanimity on every word, right? This is the generosity that was in listening that was present was unbelievable. So it'd be like, okay, first sentence, how do you feel? And somebody would be like, this. And they'd say, so what's bothering you about that? Well, I'm not comfortable because. And they'd say, well, can we fix that up? And we'd fix it up. And we went through like the one that got me was they had working software over documentation. I said, I can't defend that. You need documentation. I'm not going to stand out in public and say working software over documentation, right? You can't do that. So the only thing we could get off of that was comprehensive documentation. And it's not optimal, but it got me off the hook. Right? So we did that on every single one. And there was this final moment where we go, so how does everybody feel? 17 of us, sitting around the whiteboard. And 17 thumbs go straight up. And like our eyes were like big like saucers. Like, oh my God, did we just do that? Unbelievable. So we go, okay, so now we've got a name, we got values. Is there anything more you can say? Right? There's a lot of them. Maybe we could write some principles. And now the differences between the people started to show up. Right? Because one's very vague and a little bit more, but still very vague. And then the closer you get to day-by-day recommendations, the more differences, right? And then people start leaving airplanes, and so well, let's try to keep this up by email. Now we tried, emails back and forth, but it's not the same. The magic was in the room. The magic was in the room, right? So at some point, somebody goes, pull the plug, whatever's there is there. Like somebody finish it up, or just take what's there, publish it, call it good. We're not going to get the same level of agreement by email over these principles. And so I go around giving talks and I say, if you ever get a manifesto author in here, you should ask them which of the principles gives them heartburn. I'm pretty convinced that everybody has one principle they really didn't like.
Right.
And I have 2 of them. The one is emergent architecture, right? The best designs are emergent because emergent has a very specific meaning in physics. And I don't think it's like lightning comes down and makes something, right? It's emerges from fog works, but not emergent as in physics, chaotic behavior emergent, right? And the Scrum guys are much bigger on self-organization than I am. Yeah, that's their thing. It's not my thing, right? So you can find where we each of us kind of yielded, and I ask people, if you ever get any of the other authors here, ask them which principle kind of sticks in their craw, because one of them I'm sure he does. So yeah, so we did get close. We got certain distance while we were there. We did some emails, and then we said pull the plug and ship it. And then the next thing that was big was in Uppsala, it would have been of that year, so October probably of 2001. We had another meeting, and the problem was we were held up because we were doing everything unanimously. 17 people agreeing on every single thing. So basically nothing more got done. And so somebody proposes, hey, can we stop with this unanimity thing? And what I say or sort of said would be like, everybody takes a banner and runs and shouts as loud as they can, and whoever runs the fastest, shouts the loudest, has the best banner, like moves it, right? But it's a free for all now. Everybody go. And so we took one more vote. This was funny. We took one more vote. Okay, so we don't need unanimity for actions anymore. Everybody does what they want, and we got unanimous agreement on that. Like everybody studied, like we just let the whole thing out. Like now it's a free for all. And then the next thing, Ken Schwaber says, "Hey guys, I kind of want to start an organization, you know." And we had been calling ourselves the Agile Alliance, right? And he didn't have the name, but eventually it was hard on us because we called ourselves the Agile Alliance, the 17. He created a nonprofit organization called the Agile Alliance, which didn't consist of the 17, right? So there was a split there that people don't know about. But anyways, he goes, so I'd like to start something, pretend he says, call it the Agile Alliance. Is that okay? And we go, we just voted that we don't get to say anything. Just if that's what you want to do, go, man. Right? So that was it. Like it got tested in an instant. And after that, it was all free for all. So yeah, no, we wouldn't have come back a year later. And, you know, no, we never met again. Never met again. That's that.
But you agreed by email, right?
Well, yeah, it was like we're close enough. We're not going to get closure. What we've got is good enough. You know, make it. And I don't know what the difference was between the second to the last version and the last version. That was, for me, it was past carrying it. Yeah, one of those will be good.
Right. And so now it's 19 years later. I mean, what's it all add up to?
Well, so here's the thing that I do differently than other people. A lot of people pissed off what happened, right? And I have a kind of a founding belief mantra where I go, if you have a good idea, it'll either be misappropriated, misquoted, misused, perverted, or ignored. And you don't get to choose which. The world will do something. So I've written several manifestos, and none of them have been perverted because nobody knows they exist. Right? You don't get to choose. So all the bad things that happen to me are just normal consequence of being successful, right? Say, well, you know, executives are using it and people are making money. I go, yeah, you don't think that would be true of anything else? Anything else that even smelled like money and power, those guys would use it for money and power. Like it doesn't even matter what X is. Your alternative is nobody knows you exist. Right. So yeah, so I take it. So I go, there was somebody, G. Paul Hill on Twitter, goes, I'm so burned out and tired and disillusioned from this. I said, well, what's your alternative? You're going to go quiet? No, there's like, say it's 100 people with what we think are healthy voices and 10,000 with unhealthy voices. What's your choice? Go quiet? No, you got to keep going. It's, you know, you against the 10,000. Doesn't matter. And so Heart of Agile is my current version of that, right? Yeah. I love it. I love it. It's great. Try to make it so simple. And the other thing is I can't fight against Scrum Alliance, SAFe, PMI at a commercial level. So I decided we're just going to make it viral, right? Just make it grassroots. And it's so simple, you know, with the 4 words, collaborate, deliver, reflect, improve, and nothing else, that you can slide it underneath any other methodology, right? You're doing Scrum? Good. How about we work on collaborating? You're doing Waterfall? How about we work on collaborating, right? And it also goes over the top. So like different divisions that some banks in Australia, you know, one wants to do less and one's SAFe and one wants, you know, Scrum at scale. You put it over the top and say, okay, you guys do whatever you want. Can we just look at how good the collaboration is? Right? Et cetera, et cetera. So it's kind of nice. It's very non-invasive. It's very simple for people to catch a hold of. And so that's my... The danger there is, as you would recognize, and I was conscious about this, the mechanical aspects are the easiest to copy. The behavioral is the only place where the action is, and it's the hardest, right? And I took that on. So I very carefully made them imperatives. Collaborate, deliver, reflect, improve are imperatives. So there's no window dressing. It's all behavior. And I just decided I was going to take that on, right? We'll just go straight after the behavior. And there's nothing else. That was my call on this, whatever. This is my like 3rd or 4th round of Fourth round. This is my fourth round. I'm doing these things.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. But and so so you're charging ahead on your. And do you ever see the other guys?
Well, there are some people who are, really like Dave Thomas is on record. He doesn't
Mhm.
like what happened with it. He doesn't want anything to do with it. He's actually said, "I'm sorry, I wrote it." He actually said that, and I go, but so literally, you think the world is a worse place than if you hadn't? I think the world's a better place, right? All the power people do
I,
what they do.
I certainly think so. Yeah,
Yeah. Well,
absolutely.
but the point is, he won't touch it. He won't get together, and Kent Beck, yeah, he lost power, and I know I'm saying this on tape, and Kent may get to see it, but for me, XP owned the world. Frankly, nobody had heard of Scrum at the time. Nobody had heard
Right,
of any. Really, nobody had heard of any of the other ones aside from some small number of
right,
projects. Kent
right.
owned the world, and suddenly he was a player on a stage with 17 other players. And he said he was sick, and that could be true, but there's no way he couldn't have known that basically it was a power loss for him.
Hmm.
So for whatever reason, he distances himself, and he goes, "Well, I'm kind of
Hmm.
sad what happened. I wasn't really there. I wasn't paying attention. Whatever that may be." Right?
Hmm.
So he's not going to come together. Ward Cunningham's not really interested. Dave Thomas is fully against it.
Hmm.
So there's some people who will never come back. Whatever they may be even sorry they were involved. They're sorry it happened. Whatever.
Hmm.
And 10 years ago, Laurie Williams organized for the 2011 Agile conference. She got
Yeah,
out of the
yeah,
17 people. She got maybe 12 people together. I don't know, 14.
yeah. I saw that. Yeah, absolutely.
That was
And
amazing. And what she did that was really cool. It was really brilliant on her part. She got us one of those like executive smoking room
hmm.
salon places,
Hmm.
and she said, "I just got you this room for the evening, and there will
Hmm.
be unlimited drinks and food. And just go be in the room and don't tell us anything about it." It was
Hmm.
really cool, right? No report out. So we got together and chatted about this and that and this and that and so on. It was really, really wonderful. So who knows if somebody will do something like that in 2021?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the manifesto was a real landmark, and you can't really redo a landmark.
No, you can't. No. Well, the other thing that's interesting is, and I'm going to overstate it a tiny bit, but not too much. I'm going to say it this way. There's really only been two times in history when people have gotten together to discuss what is software development done, how is it done. One was
Hmm.
in 1968, NATO Software and Conference on Software Engineering, and they
Hmm.
recorded everything. They had a sense of history, and they recorded everything, and it's wonderful. You can read every word they said, and it's a
Hmm.
superbly interesting reading. And they came out with whatever they came out with, right? So they said that. That's what we're here for, right? And
Right.
I don't know what else there was, but this was another one where we got together and we said, what is it?
Hmm.
And we came up with ours, right? So
Right.
68 and 2001 were these two significant meetings where people said, what is this thing? What are we doing?
Hmm.
Right? And so it was a second chance to, rerun that discussion with different people. And that's how I
Right.
look at it. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I mean, I've been asking you questions. I'm going to have to drop off after a bit, but
Yeah. Yeah. It's been, what time
you
is
have
it?
any
12:15.
you have any questions for me? That.
No, no, I am happy to be in contact with you now. I've
Hmm.
been following your writing, and I think it's
Hmm.
very interesting how you've taken this and transplanted it into that, and made a very cogent, right, framework for talking about that and analysis and all the rest of that. So I always enjoy that. So in my case,
Hmm.
I'm just mostly happy to have a introduction to you.
Oh, that's great. I mean, and it's a kind of an open invitation. I mean, Ron Jeffries from every now and then sort of writes to me and says, "That's bullshit what you just wrote," and
Yeah.
that's.
Oh, so good. Now I feel like we're on first name basis. I can write you and say that I wouldn't write you that before. Maybe now I'll quarrel with something if there's something I want
No,
to
if
quarrel with.
you like something, tell me that was great. If you
No,
don't
I
like
like
it,
most of your stuff. I mean, I mostly when people write, I just go, are they making any sense or not? Right? Do I have to like literally close my eyes whenever they write, or can I say, oh yeah, read this person, right? And so
uh,
your take was a bit different, but it all made sense. So I go, oh yeah, Steve Denning's writing about all of that.
well, I'm trying to take the heart, if you like, of what you guys were up to. And
Well, I think that one of the things that got us semi-introduced was on Twitter. Somewhat, you had said that it all comes out of lean, and that can't be right. It doesn't come out of lean.
Well, success has many parents.
Well, that's why I say. But you see, since I didn't know anything about lean, when you say it comes out of lean, you have to take my history into account. I knew. You have to pick that up.
It doesn't. That's what did I say? It came out of lean. Lean was certainly in the year that say Jeff had come to some extent from the lean world, and
that's one person out of 17. That's what I'm saying, right?
But there were
Ari von Bennekom wouldn't have known anything about lean. I didn't know anything about lean. The pragmatic programmers didn't know anything about lean, right? So you can't do that, right?
Okay.
My history is ethnographic research from scratch. I was just asked what works. I did my research, I did my thinking, I wrote it down, right? So there's no other influence on me other than the small talk guys, right? Ward Cunningham, Ken Beck, and Rebecca. There's no lean anywhere in there. So you can't, as far as I'm concerned, that's 1/17th. It's a fraction of 1/17th of the history.
That's on the 17th. If you dig deeply, you can...
Oh, you can find parallels. Look, when I found out about lean, I went, wow, they came from a totally different heritage and produced very similar ideas. But they do set-based development, which XP doesn't do. Right? So there's some things that are fundamentally different with lean. You're supposed to follow the process and do the Kaizen on the process. That was never in Agile. So there are some really fundamentally different things about lean. If we just look at small batch, that's such a small part of lean. That isn't negligible. You go to Toyota and say lean is small batch, they'll go read page 1, right? So if you say Agile has in common with lean that they work in small batches and try to do improvements, to my mind, you haven't said anything yet, right?
No,
so that's where my disagreement is, right?
Okay, well, I'll take that back.
There you go. Well, just take it as the two things is when people say lean and Agile, you have to really look point for point. The fact that there's some overlap is cool, but doesn't make them the same. And if you look at the history, you have to look at mine, because I didn't know anything about lean, and I did everything grounded research on up.
Well, I now know about your background and ethnography, and that's a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, so I have no background in, except Ward Cunningham, Kent Beck, Rebecca Wiersbrock, RDD, CFC cards are fundamental. The patterns community way of talking was fundamental, right? Those are the communities I was in. But my recommendations are straight up out of ethnographic research.
Yeah, fascinating.
Yeah.
I went to your website and it said your thesis was on the website on Wikipedia, but I couldn't find it because it was cited.
I'll send it to you.
Under construction. I'd be interested in taking a look at that.
Yeah. I have the PDF and I have the link also, but I'll send you the PDF. It's more fun to read.
Terrific. Okay.
Hey,
wonderful.
You probably have to go also, so.
Yeah, let's stay in touch. Huh?
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Okay, bye.